Hey guys, thanks for joining us here at Salty Ginger Talk. Returning listeners, it's great to have you back. If you're new to the channel, really glad you joined us. Hope you like what you hear. In our tradition of finding awesome people to come on the podcast, we have yet another awesome person. We got connected to Alex Rosalez through one of our previous podcast guests, Ayush. And Alex and I had several great conversations. We've been trading texts back and forth, and he's just a really, really thoughtful guy. I love his approach to how he thinks through things. He's very authentic. He's very open, and he's very direct, but in such a useful and thoughtful way. I just love having conversations with the guy. He's an awesome guy. And you're going to love the conversation that we have with him on the podcast here. And without any further ado, let's just bring Alex onto the podcast now. All right. So, Alex, thank you so much for joining us here at Salty Ginger Talk. I've really been looking forward to having you on the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. I've been very much looking forward to this.
Yeah. So, for the listeners, Alex and I got connected through one of our previous guests, Ayush. And it's a good connection to say the least. Alex and I hit it off right away, and we've had a couple of really good conversations and been trading some texts. He's a really thoughtful guy. I love his perspective on things, which is different than mine in a lot of instances, but I love how thoughtful he is and the way he's able to articulate it. And I think there's an awesome conversation for all of us to be had here. And so I've been super excited to bring him on the podcast, and here we are. So, Alex, you mind giving just our format? We usually have people kind of walk through their life and what they've learned, et cetera, et cetera. I think we can do that, but I think our conversation will probably take a couple of different turns, but it'd be good for our audience just to kind of know a little bit about you before we jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things on my podcast, I just recently started a podcast this year called Transformational Journeys. And a question I like to ask people is, who are they without saying what they do or what they have? So I will start by answering that question for myself. I am a person that greatly values authenticity. I kind of obsess over understanding myself and the world around me. I never feel satisfied about that level of understanding, although fortunately I do have a pragmatic side and that keeps me from being paralyzed. And I do move forward with what I do know. And that's where I also value my emotions, because my emotions help me to have that compass of, do I understand things enough to be able to make a decision and move forward, right? So I value the role that emotions play in our life. And as a man, I think that can be really challenging. I've been on this journey through my life where, as a man, I was conditioned, and as a boy, I was conditioned that emotions were almost like a four-letter word, a bad thing, right? And so I've had this sort of tension in my life of, I'm a very sensitive person. I feel things intensely. And when I was younger, I thought that that meant that I was less of a man. But now that I've gotten older, I realize, no, that's actually part of what makes me a man, is that I have these strong feelings. And it's learning to have a healthy relationship with them that is helping serve me in my life and helping me to understand, who I am and what my place is in the world. And so then beyond myself, I care deeply about others, about growing and developing others. My podcast is similar to yours. I walk through people's life journeys, and the focus is on how people discover their authentic selves and how they move towards that in the face of societal expectations and norms. And then the way that I make a living for myself is through technology. I've been working with technology since I was, I was probably like 6 or 7 when I first started tinkering around in a computer. So I'm going to just date myself right away and say that was back in 1982, 83, around that period. So I kind of grew up with, as personal computers evolved, I too grew, right? So I kind of evolved as a person alongside personal computers to the internet to the cloud computing to AI to, these generative models and LLMs and where we are today. And I've spent most of my career working at Amazon. I was there for 20 years, 22 years actually. Um, and more recently, I was at Snapchat. And lately, this last couple of years, I took a career break and I've been focused on personal development. And I've also been working on building an app to help podcasters become better podcasters. So, anyways, I hope that's a good summary of just like who I am without what I do, but then also talking a little bit about what I do.
Love it. No, I think that's I think that's awesome. And you touched on one of the subjects you and I have kicked around a little bit, and we'll continue to kick around as our relationship develops for sure. And it's kind of the genesis of why I started this podcast originally was so I'm 53. I've been married to my wife for 32 years. We raised three sons together, so they're all adult men out in the world. And I feel like we did a good job largely because of my wife is just the best person I've ever met. She has such a high emotional intelligence, and I've learned so much from being in a relationship with her for 3+ decades. And I do all right on that perspective, but it's kind of like being married to Michael Jordan as it relates to emotional intelligence. So
Right.
you're only going to be so good compared to the greatest,
Yeah.
But
It sounds like
but
a
I
good role
noticed
model to have in your life, though.
for sure. Yeah, for sure. You have to be, the key is you got to be smart enough to shut up and learn the lessons. And I haven't always been smart enough to shut up and learn the lessons. I'm better now than I was previously, but all of us are imperfect for sure. But I noticed as my sons kind of went out into the world, it's a very different world than the one I entered as a young man.
Mm-hmm.
And I entered a very different way than most people do as well. So, we talked a little bit about this. I went through college on a baseball scholarship. And so I participated in team sports from the time I was literally 4 years old until the time I married my wife. So I always had a group of guys that had at least one interest similar to mine that I was around a lot. So I had a peer group that was always available to talk. And you spend a lot of time in baseball around batting cages or on buses or in hotel rooms. And so those conversations kind of happen organically. And then my wife and I were very young when we met, and I was 21 and she was 19 when we got married. And, we've been together ever since. So I've always had kind of someone or some group of people that I could go to and talk about things and lean on. And that's not necessarily the way the world is now. And so I wanted a place where people could talk about stuff that mattered, that was important to them. Like, I'm well educated on politics and I'm very quick on my feet. So if I wanted to start like a snarky political podcast that got tons of views and I just don't see the value in that. There's people out there that do that, and more power to them. I'm not judging them. I just have no interest in it. I'm like you, and I think that's what kind of instantly connected us was the authenticity. I can tell you're genuinely who you are, and I think you can tell I'm genuinely who I am. So even if we don't see a particular subject or a particular topic the same way, we can certainly have a meaningful conversation around it and learn from each other when we do it.
Yeah,
And
well, that's why I like to lead with the values, because if you can't align on what you do or what you have, if you can align on values, opens a whole avenue of connection that could then open you to all new things to do that you never considered, right? So, yeah.
plus a different way of thinking. And that's what I'm always interested in. I always like to challenge myself to say, hey, sure, I've got strongly held beliefs, and I'm sure I have things that I am certain are true that I've believed for a long time, but am I right? I don't know. Maybe I'm not. Yeah. And if you talk to someone that's thoughtful and thinks about it differently, you can learn from that if you're open-minded enough to do it. And that's the benefit I get personally from the podcast. So with all that said, you talked about, and we're roughly the same age. I'm a couple of years ahead of you, but we grew up in similar times. And there was a lot of walk it off, be a man, toughen up, don't be a pussy, don't cry, all of those things. I fit okay in that environment because I'm kind of wired that way to begin with. And I heard you describe that you didn't fit real well in that environment.
Yeah.
How do you think about that now, looking back on it? What type of impact do you think that had on the way you see the world or the way you approach the world now? And what have you learned from that as you've kind of moved through the world?
Yeah, I used to feel bad about it. Like I used to feel bad that I didn't have the experience you did. I used to feel bad that I didn't have that kind of connection with other men growing up, other boys, other men growing up. I was a loner. I didn't have friends. And now it's funny you mentioned Yush because I went through that separation and not having that. I've had to learn to get back to it as an adult, as a man, and learn how to get there methodically. And we can talk about why I wasn't there. I think that'll be interesting for your audience too. But let's talk about your question. And because I had to get there kind of methodically and thoughtfully and intentionally with a lot of work and effort and pain and sadness and struggle and as opposed to it something I just had out the get-go, I have a strong sense of the value of it and I have a strong sense of how to get there and why it's important. And I'm able now, at least I feel like I'm able to impart that on younger men. So, like, for example, I just started lifting about 6 years ago, and I have had a number of trainers who are in their 20s, and we'll have conversations about things like this. I'm able to help them see things and situations they're struggling with their girlfriends or with their job or their life, and giving them that perspective. Or with Ayush, for example, we've just been talking today about some of the stuff he's going through, and I feel like I'm able to help him in his mid 20s to get where I'm at in my late 40s. And that is like such a blessing that I wouldn't give up for the world because it's deeper, more meaningful connection. And I didn't get to my other values, but the value after authenticity is connection for me, and it gives me more connection. I realize I've been speaking in very abstract terms. What happened for me growing up was that I knew, and other kids could tell that I was different, and I was different on multiple dimensions. One, being neurodivergent, I was just I would always get hyper fixated on anything I was studying. Um, I was, back then I think we didn't have the words we have now like neurodivergent or autism or things like
Yeah.
that. It was just I was a nerd. I was a geek. I was a
A
weirdo.
weirdo. Yeah. There
Yeah,
was
yeah,
all
yeah.
sorts of labels thrown around back in the day.
Uh-huh.
That's exactly
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And we could argue whether they were harmful or not, but the thing is they're kind of like what's important is that they weren't specific enough. So they didn't help me understand who I was. They just made me feel like an outsider, right? And so I didn't have that connection with my peers because of that. And then even at an early age, I could tell that there was something different about how I related with other people of my gender and other genders. And I later realized, oh, maybe it has something to do with the fact that I'm gay, which I didn't realize till I was went through puberty. But then it was like this aha moment of
Hmm.
that's what was different about me this whole time, and I couldn't put a finger on it. And just to fast forward, when I'm hearing you tell your story about your wife and how she helped you elevate your emotional intelligence by being a Michael Jordan that you had to like live up to and learn from. A lot of the research I've done has shown that for heterosexual men, so for example, there's a study that was done that showed that when heterosexual men, they suffer breakups worse than heterosexual women do. That's more devastating when there's a breakup for the
Hmm.
man than the woman, which is a surprise, I think, because intuitively you think it might be more intense for the woman because the stereotype is that you know women maybe are more sentimental, more romantic, care more about these sorts of things. But what happens is the reason for it that they found was that these men were finding their emotional regulation through their wives, through their girlfriends and wives, that they were giving them that support. And when the breakup happened, they lost that, whereas their wives and girlfriends were still getting it from their girlfriends, the women in their lives, and the men weren't, and they were isolated. And I had this aha moment when I heard that, because as a gay man, I have just had other men in my life. So and those men didn't always do the best job of providing me with emotional support in my relationships. And then when the relationship ended, I did all I had was just more men in my life, and my relationship with my mom and my sister weren't that great, Not that they were bad, but I also was no vulnerability or anything. And it
Hmm.
wasn't until the last few years that I started to develop a closer connection with my mom and my sister and some of the men in my life. And then I started to experience what that feels like to get that emotional support. Um, and and so that was just one example of where thought like, well, hey, the fact that I didn't have that like you did, having your wife for 30 years, has helped me in the sense that I know what it's like to not get that, and I know how important it is to get that, and I know what the process is to get there, and, at least for me, and I can share that with others, and hopefully that can help them get there. So they're not just relying on their girlfriends or their wives or their therapist or whoever it is, that they can find the support that they need to live a better life and show up better in the world for themselves and for others.
Yeah, that's super interesting. For what it's worth, I find that study very easy to believe. That makes a lot of sense to me. Like when I think about my own experience, so I've always been in different terms. It's the same word, but different connotation for me. I've always been very different than other
Mhm.
people. I've thought about the world differently. I've always been pretty contrarian. I've always questioned things, questioned authority. If it didn't, I wouldn't do something just because I was told to do it. It had to make sense to me
Mhm.
to do it. And I wasn't rebellious and I wasn't obstinate, but I had to understand why if I was going
Mhm.
to commit to it, if I was going to put my
Right.
effort into it.
Right.
And I also really enjoy time to myself.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
I've never wanted like a big group of friends. Now, the
Mhm.
trade-off for that, at least from my experience, the way I am wired in general, is that if you are in my inner circle, I extract a ton from the people. Like I rely a lot
Mhm.
on the people in my inner
Mhm.
circle. So they're very, very important to me. So I feel like for me personally, there's a real dichotomy with me. I can either literally not give a shit about you, or I care more deeply than I think most people are capable of caring about another person.
Mhm.
So it's a very interesting dynamic because you would think that the ability to kind of and I know it sounds bad and callous. It's just the truth, though. I'm able to say that person doesn't matter to me, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time or effort worrying about or thinking about them. That doesn't mean I don't want to help people, but like
Mhm.
I have the ability. If someone criticizes me, I look at who's criticizing me, and if it's not someone that's trying to do the same things I am or understands what I'm trying to do, I don't care. Like that's okay. You can not like me. That's fine. But by the same token, I am deeply rooted with the people that are important to me, which is largely family. But I've always had a ton of acquaintances. And so I think it probably gave me the luxury to be the way I just described that I am because I wasn't ever seeking it out. I didn't I wasn't searching for it because the things I was good at as a young man carried a high social currency. So I was a good athlete,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
if you're a
You
guy
got
and a
that
good athlete,
validation. You got
yeah,
validated. Yeah.
you could have been
Just
a
by what you were
terrible human
doing.
being. Yeah.
Yeah.
You could have been a terrible human being, but if you could throw a ball or shoot a ball or kick a
Yep.
ball or whatever,
Uh-huh.
oh, what a great
Yeah.
guy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I was really good in school. Grades came very
Mhm.
easily to me. And
Yep.
so good grades, good athlete, high social currency for men. It was
Mhm.
easy for me to kind of float in and out of different groups, but I always knew I was never a part of each group. I was
Mhm.
said differently. I wasn't in one group. I took AP classes, so everyone that was kind of the brains, I was friends with all of them because I had classes with them.
Hmm.
But I wasn't a part of that group. And the athletes, I was a good athlete, but I wasn't like a beer guzzling, skirt chasing jerk.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and I'm using stereotypes here, so my
Yeah.
apologies to the non beer guzzling, skirt chasing athletes. There's not a lot of them. I was around you guys.
Yeah.
You're not going to fool me. So I was
Those
accepted by
those
that
were the
group.
fun ones though. So, I mean, like,
Oh, exactly. So I was never a part of that. But it's
mm,
interesting to hear me talk about your experience because I think your experience is much closer to like my sons, the way they grew up than the
mhm,
way I grew up because they
yeah,
didn't have those same experiences that I had because they didn't naturally excel at the things I naturally excelled at. And so that was hard for me as a father to kind of figure out how to help them. And I wanted to help them,
yeah.
but it was a good thing my wife was around because I would have screwed that up in a major way if she had not been
Mhm.
the one steering the boat as it related to those things.
What I think you're saying is that you grew up with attributes that society sort of like intrinsically rewarded. And so you didn't have to fight very hard for acceptance or validation,
That's right.
even though you kind of didn't really need it anyways, because you, like you said, you'd like, oh, that group accepted me, but they didn't really resonate with me. I didn't really need to be in a group. It's like, you have $1 million and people are like, oh, here's another $1 million. I'm like, okay, great. I don't need more. I got enough. So like, I mean, actually, if you had 1 million, to take another million, but you get my point is that you,
Yep.
you didn't need it. But when you're in a situation where your inherent skills and who you are aren't so inherently or intrinsically or naturally validated by society, it's a tough place growing up. And you can get into your head and you can start to feel like, am I really enough? Am I really worthy? Do I belong in this world? And and it was a lot different, for us in the 80s. I think the sort of window of what is valued was very narrow. But what's funny is I think now it's wider, but it's narrower in other ways now, right? So like it's wider in the sense like, for example, I got into tech without a college degree because you can be successful right now if you just have the right skills and you can find the people who need them. But what's different is in terms of like what society values, social media has made that window super narrow, right? Where it's like, um, you almost social media makes you think that you're not successful unless you're like if you're a man unless you're driving Bugattis and have all kinds of women and muscles and all these things, right? And so I could imagine the pressure is really high in some ways, and that your sons, you're on top of it. They might feel like their lives are on display in the social media if they engage with social media,
Yeah.
and it's not as private as it was when we were growing up. So it's I wouldn't say it's harder or easier. It's just a lot different. But going back to what you were saying about that validation, you kind of highlighted another thing I wanted to highlight that's been a challenge for me, which is that because I grew up that way, because I didn't get that validation, I developed this insatiable hunger for external validation. And so what I mean by that is that I felt like I wasn't worthy or enough unless I got that validation from others. And I was getting it from my work, having a successful career at Amazon, but I wasn't getting it outside of my work. And so what it led to in like it was going into unhealthy relationships, getting into unhealthy, spending habits, unhealthy, eating habits, unhealthy, fitness, things like that. Because when your motivation for doing things is not coming from a place of authenticity, of what's genuine for you, but it's coming from a place of trying to fulfill some need to please others, you actually don't address the root cause of your lack of fulfillment. You're just on this never-ending treadmill of, I got to get more money, I have to get more love, I have to get more validation, I have to get, you know, more of these things, and it's never enough. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I realized that I can get that validation internally. And when I do get it internally, then come from a place of being fulfilled, come from a place of not feeling so needy about getting those needs met. And so my relationships become more fulfilling, more meaningful. And the relationships that don't serve me, it's easier to walk away from them because I don't need them. The relationships that I do have are relationships that I want, not because, oh, if I don't have this relationship, I'm going to be less of a person, right? But
Yeah.
I
So
want
I
to
think what
spend
you just,
time with these people. Yeah.
yeah, I think what you said there is so important. The recognizing that the most fulfilling validation comes from inside versus external. How did you recognize that that was off kilter with you? How did you recognize that was a challenge for you?
Um, the short answer is this awesome dude named Julian Blanc. Um, he has videos on YouTube. He talks about this, and I did a 8 week mentorship course with him. Um, it is really important to highlight that because I spent most of my life trying to figure out what was wrong, what was causing me to feel empty, to have long periods of depression, of having unfulfilling relationships, codependent relationships, and I wasn't getting anywhere. Um, and I think part of the reason is because I was thinking about my problems a lot
Mm.
and thinking and reading and studying and talking and thinking, but like no action. And so I finally took action and I took his course, and his course is not a bunch of him sitting there telling you what you should do. It's not him sitting there advising you, coaching you, giving you the secrets. What it is 8 weeks of diving deep into 8 different emotional states. And where is it within you that those emotions are holding you back in your life? So the first one is apathy. What is emotion? What does it feel like to not feel apathy? Up to sadness, anger, courage, purpose, and love. And in that process of exploring each of those emotions, I started to realize that a lot of what I was doing was being driven not from this core emotional state, but from wanting to fulfill these external uh, expectations upon me because I didn't feel like I was enough, because I didn't feel like I was worthy enough to exist, to say this is making me angry because blah blah blah, and my anger is valid, even if it goes against what everyone else thinks is valid to be angry about, for example.
Mm.
And that was also one of the core messages that he helped me realize too, was that like if I want to take up space, I don't need anybody's permission to do that except for my own. And anytime that am looking for other people's validation about what I'm doing, it's really just so I can then have permission to validate myself. So if I'm saying like, you know, Joe is, do you like this shirt I'm wearing? Do you like it? And you say yes, I'm like, oh yes, now I can like it too, right?
Right.
That's really what we're doing.
Yeah.
Unless it's genuinely like, hey Joe, I fucking love this shirt. What do you think about it, man? And then you're like, it's okay. You're like, oh yeah, you don't seem to like it, but I love it. I love
Yeah.
this shirt. And now I know you don't like it. So, maybe, I won't get you one like it, or maybe next time, we do something that's important to you, I might not wear it because you're not, but that's a choice I might make, but I'll do it intentionally, not because I'm trying to impress you or because I want to make you happy. I'll still wear it because I want to and I care about it. And that's just one small example, but you can translate that out to like the big decisions you make about your job, about relationships. We outsource those decisions to everyone else. I think a lot of people, when they decide to get into a relationship, and I made this mistake too, we think about, well, what will other people think about this? What will my parents think about if I, get married to this person who's from a different religion, from a different political background, from a different race, ethnicity, maybe a different financial background, looks a certain way, whatever it is.
Mm,
But you really love that person and you authentically want to get involved with them. Why is that factoring in? There's a lot of information there to unpack for you when you sense that you're making your decisions based on other people. And that's just what I've been doing for the last couple of years is looking for, oh, when am I outsourcing, you know, my decision making to others consciously and unconsciously? And then when I go to like, okay, well, what do I need? That's where my emotions are my guide. What do I want? My emotions will tell me. This makes me angry. This makes me happy. This makes me sad. This makes me courageous. Ah, that's giving me a signal about what matters to me. And that's how I can make better decisions about what's aligned and true for me versus what am I doing just to please others.
mm. So, my wife always says that it's important to have sadness and disappointment in your life because you won't know what happiness and joy are without the sadness and the disappointment. The reason I bring that up is as you worked through this course and you had to kind of confront these various emotions from apathy to sadness to whatever they were, did you feel like you had experienced these before and just didn't know what they were? Or were these kind of new concepts to you where you're like, wow, I never really thought about it this way? Like, was it in there somewhere? Had you gone through these things and you could kind of make sense of it? Or was it kind of like an aha? I never recognized apathy or I never recognized sadness.
I want to say yes, it's all of those things.
Really?
That's the really fun thing about emotions, like it's funny because we try to attack all of these things with our rational minds, right? And our rational minds say it's got to be this or that. It has to be this one or the other. It has to be binary. But what's really cool about emotions is that you can have multiple conflicting feelings and experiences all at the same time. And I think that's why they can be scary for those of us who are very rational. Like you're very rational, I'm very rational. Men, we typically tend to be more rationally oriented, right?
Mm.
And there's value in that. Like being rational really helps us solve problems. It helps us make sense of a chaotic world. Um, at the same time, emotions allow us to make these amazing pivots in directions we never could have considered if we're just taking rationality is a very linear path, right? And emotions allow us to sort of take these big leaps and be courageous and brave and move in new directions. And emotions give us a reason to exist. If I didn't have emotions, like what's rational about consuming air and consuming resources and destroying the world? There's nothing rational about that. It doesn't make any sense. You have to have some reason beyond logic to exist. Why do I exist? Because I want to exist, right? If you take a human and you deprive them of air and food and water, they're going to fight back because of an emotion, not because they're going to say, well, this is illogical, stop doing. No, it's an emotion that's going to cause them to, right? So emotions are really fucking important. Okay, but your question was like, what was it like? Like it's interesting because your wife is a good point about, you can't know what love and joy feel like if you don't know what sadness and disappointment feel like. And that's part of the journey. I kind of shortcutted it earlier and said, well, I found this Julian Blunt guy and then changed everything. It's like, no, there was a big journey up to that where
Mm.
I was getting more and more stoic. In fact, I started practicing stoicism and not to dunk on stoicism. I think there's some good values from it, but it gets misapplied, especially in the manosphere. It's getting misapplied as like, you know, an excuse to neglect your emotional side.
I
And
totally
I
agree
think,
with you. Yes.
yeah, stoicism can be held in a healthy way if it's acknowledges and respects and values and explores your emotional side, but it's unhealthy when it isn't because I fell into this apathy and this depression. Like to your wife's point, I started because I was avoiding sadness and disappointment. I was avoiding that. I was also starting to miss out on love and joy and all those things. What I started to learn in this process, the kind of aha moment I had is, and actually this has also been through having the podcast and talking to people. Recently, I had an interview, it's going to publish soon, with Dr. Ron Anbar, and we were talking about, he's a doctor that focuses on hypnosis and the subconscious mind. And he was talking about how our brains make sense of the world through these illusions. So, for example, you're wearing this beautiful blue polo shirt. I really love the blue color that you have on. But like that blue doesn't actually exist in the world. What I'm seeing is light particles reflect or shining, not reflecting because it's a monitor, but they're shining into my eyeballs at a frequency that my brain turns that frequency. Oh, that frequency is blue. You know,
Hmm.
if we got really technical, your camera is picking those up and turning those frequencies into, ones and zeros, transporting them through the internet. Then they're coming. So it's not, that same thing, that same process of that turning it into ones and zeros in your computer. It's happening in our brain, and then our brain is saying, "Oh, those frequency. I'm going to look at it and see it as blue." But if an alien who didn't have a concept of color like we did, or the concept of interpreting those frequencies as color, they wouldn't see blue. They would see whatever it is that they've used to adapt to understand what the frequency of light is. So like red and green and purple and orange are all just frequencies of light. Those colors, we kind of make up those distinctions in our brain. I believe, and now I have no science around this at all. This is just my belief now we're getting to. But I believe that emotions are like that too. That emotions are just frequencies, and love and joy and care and courage and sadness and disappointment are just different frequencies of emotions. So if you start to tune out the sadness and disappointment, all your brain can do is just tune out the frequencies in general. And so you start to become blind to all the frequencies, not just, you can't just tune into some of the frequencies. We're not wired that way. You either tune into the emotional wavelength or you don't tune into it. And so what that experience I went through was me increasing my ability to dial back up that the ability to take in the frequency of emotion and experience those different ranges, which was important because one of those emotions is courage, right? And a lot of times people will say, well, if you start neglecting like sadness and disappointment, you'll never experience joy and love. It's like, yeah, that's important, but like you also want to experience courage. And if you don't have courage, you can never get out of the state that you're in.
Mm.
I think courage is a really important emotion because it allows us to move out of anger and sadness into action. A lot of times we get stuck in anger or sadness, and we get stuck there because, again, we're not able to tune into the whole spectrum. We're only just narrowly focused in, and it just sort of starts to consume us. So I agree with what your wife was saying. If you can't experience that set of emotions, you can't experience the rest. And it's you can't get out of the situation that you're in. You'll get stuck if you can't connect with that broad set of emotions. And I think you've seen that. You've probably seen people get stuck that way.
Well, I've been stuck. Yeah, like I
Yeah.
think anyone that
Hmm.
any. So I rarely make global statements, but I'll make this one. Anyone that says they've never experienced those things, I don't think is being honest with themselves. Because none of us travel a linear path, and all of us have our own little idiosyncrasies that cause us grief or strife or discomfort or whatever. Sometimes rationally, sometimes not rationally. But that doesn't make them any less real to the person that's experiencing them. And that's something that's you need to be accepting of that while
Hmm.
still being able to kind of challenge or discuss with people why it's important to recognize it, deal with it, and then move past it. You can't just move past it, because then you're just going to carry that baggage forward. If you don't deal with it and
Hmm.
experience it and come to terms with it, it's
Hmm.
going to come back up at some point. And I think that, at least
Yeah.
for me, that's the hard
Yeah.
part sometimes, is okay, so how do I deal with X, whatever X happens to be? And from a gender perspective, I don't think men are encouraged to talk about these things,
No.
especially with each other, right, wrong,
We're,
or
we're,
indifferent.
we're only allowed to get mad at it, but not too angry. Like, yeah, not too mad. Or we can make jokes about it, like I'm doing right now.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but I also think, right, wrong, or indifferent, what a lot of women will say is, yes, I want my man to be sensitive until
Mhm.
he's sensitive, and then they
Right.
judge him, and then he's
Right.
weak, and then, well, he's not,
Right.
and it's not an alpha.
Yeah.
So
I
I
mean,
encourage,
men and women do that too, men, right?
yep,
Like, I mean,
yep,
as men, we don't necessarily ask each other to be sensitive for us, but when we see that, we're like, no, you know, don't do that, right?
to a
That,
point,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think if you get in with the right group of people, right group of men,
Hmm.
that will naturally, you can't
And
lead with it, because if you lead
that's
with
right.
it, it's going to make you appear needy and soft and
Hmm.
blah blah blah. But if you establish a relationship with someone, and like you and I just started talking to each other, so I love the fact that we're able to have like a deep and meaningful conversation like this, because I think it shows an emotional maturity that I value, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And but a lot of men, especially younger men, have to kind of figure out that cadence. And you'd reference this earlier, and we'll get back to it, about how you've kind of figured that out, and kind of a process or processes that work for you, that you try to impart on younger men to help them travel that journey faster and or more successfully or easily than you
Yep.
did. But one of the things I encourage men to do is, you have to focus on the environment in which these types of conversations happen most of the time. And I think we talked about this, but I believe men relate better shoulder to shoulder than face to face. So
Mm.
if you get yourself in a situation where, like, golfing is a good example, you're sitting next to each other in a
Hmm.
golf cart. If you
Yeah.
take a road
Yep.
trip with somebody,
Yep.
if you watch a game with somebody, if you're sitting
Yeah.
on the couch watching something, it's a
Yeah.
lot easier to have that conversation without, like, what we're
Yeah.
doing right now.
I,
Whereas
I,
women,
I call it, I call it broing out.
yeah. There you
Yeah,
go.
you got to be broing out. You can't. It's not like with women. They like let's get together and we'll talk about stuff. Like no, no, no.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. That's exactly right.
yeah,
That's,
yeah.
and I think that matters sometimes.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think it will help
Yep.
men be more successful
Hmm.
to get what they need. So,
Yep.
and there's a component of that that I also agree with, that at some point, when you're dealing with people you care about, you have to help them draw the line and say, okay, we've covered a lot of territory here, and we've wallowed in this quite a. What's the go forward? How do we move forward from here and get past this? Because we can't just get stuck here, like you were talking about. And that can be a hard
It's
thing to understand, when to do that.
yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because like I think a lot of times people are afraid to provide that emotional support because they're afraid it's going to be like a wallowing kind of like we're just stuck here. So, if you came to me and you said like, oh, I just had this disappointment and his contract fell through and I'm just really upset about it and I'm disappointed. And I just went and said, okay, fine, Joe. I know you've been upset about this for weeks, but like, what are you going to do about it? You might be like, well, I like, look, but I still, I'm still upset about this because you didn't feel validated or heard by me. But if I validated you and said, yeah, that really sucks. And I would be frustrated too if that contract fell through. I worked so hard to get it. And you worked so hard to get it. I know how much it meant to you. And be like, yeah, it really meant a lot to me. And then like, we spent a little bit of time talking about what you're feeling and me validating it and Not saying like you have nothing to be upset about, Joe, because you'll get the next contract, you'll get the next
Mm,
deal going, you'll get the you don't worry about it. You won't be ready to move to action because you won't have felt like I heard you or validated you, right? Especially as another man. But if I did validate it, then I wouldn't even have to most of the time, not always, but more likely than not, I won't have to pull you to action. Because once I've validated that and helped you feel heard and expressed and helped you tell your emotions that, because it's ultimately about you and your connection to emotions, that hey, you've been heard, then you can move to action. These emotions are like the best analogy. Julian, my mentor that I had last year, on one of his videos recently, was talking about his best analogy is like they're like children. This, like, let's say the disappointment in the example we used before is like a child that
mm.
wants to be heard. And if you ignore it or you neglect it or you whatever, it's going to just keep getting louder and louder and louder. And it'll just keep pulling you back and pulling you back. But if you acknowledge it and say, I hear you, yes, what you're feeling is important and valuable, and I value what you're providing me, then it's like, okay. And then it's able to go on, and now you can move to action. But if you don't do that, it'll just keep pulling you. You'll just get that's how we get stuck. And it serves a purpose, right? Those emotions are doing that because they're like, hey, you didn't hear me. You didn't hear me. You don't know how important this is. You're avoiding it. I need you to acknowledge how important this is. Then I will let you move on from this feeling. It's like that, the engine light, that's like blinking,
Right.
except imagine if that engine light could like get so big that you couldn't see the road in front of you. That's
Mm.
what the emotions are like. But I also agree with. I think it's like important to know how do you talk about these things with your bros, with your friends, with like it's just that's something I'm still also figuring out. I think it's funny because I think podcasts are turning into a way for us to do this as men because we are face to face, but there's still this sort of like, oh,
Yeah.
but you know,
There's a safety zone.
yeah, well, we're still broing out, right? We're broing out because it's like, there's what broing out is that you're doing something, you're an activity, you're like,
Yeah.
you know, drinking beers, watching the game, playing video games, throwing ball, whatever, podcasting, that's how Ayush and I got there, right? We started out podcasting and then having these conversations, and then eventually now we're comfortable, we can have a face-to-face conversation. It doesn't have to be side by side, but I think you're right. You need to start out, in the safe, like structured space. But yeah, I don't. It's funny because I don't think there's a guide that talks about how to do this, is there? Maybe there is. I
No,
don't know. Yeah.
no, not at all. And
Damn. That's
I
wild,
so
man. No wonder we have a male mental health crisis.
yeah, no kidding. Yeah, the whole suffer in silence thing doesn't really work. And look, I'm a huge advocate for men taking leadership roles, and that there are good things about traditional masculinity that are important for society that cannot get lost. But
Yeah.
I think when like when I say, and when I was on Ayusha's podcast, we talked a lot about this because with the generational difference between he and I, he grew up in and moved into a very different world than the one I grew up in and moved into. And I think when someone brings up traditional masculinity, I think the stereotypical image that most people conjure up is like the 1950s television dad who's sitting around the house smoking a pipe and goes out to the study and has a drink and never has any emotions and always has the right answer. And, behind the scenes, he's beating his wife and drinking to excess and swallowing his feelings, and he dies of a heart attack when he's 49. And that's not it. That's not
It's
what we're
also
talking about.
what's also interesting as you were talking about that, I was thinking about like, isn't it funny that we call that traditional, but that was like what 70 years ago, and humans have existed for thousands of years. Like that would be like saying what happened, 80s was traditional or like night, like there's when you look at patterns over time, you can have this sort of recency bias and assume that that's the way things have always been. but like the 50s and were a very unique period in human history, especially in the US. We and it extends to now, but like this idea of like the atomic family where it's just a husband and wife and one or two kids in a four-bedroom house with a two-car garage in a suburb isolated. Like that concept only appeared in after World War II.
Yep.
It was families were so much different before that. And then before the Industrial Revolution, they were a lot different. And then before, we just keep going back and look at all sorts of, you and I talked about this a little bit, even culturally, about how like, my ethnicity being Mexican, like our family structures are a bit different. And there's clues there about how, what the traditional father figure looks like hasn't always been the same. So we can look to the past for some examples of what masculinity is or what it can or should look like, but it's not the whole picture if we just look at one slice of it, I think that when we look at other cultures too, you get, other examples. I'm kind of going out of my depth here, but there's other cultures that are more should I say, it's not social. Yeah, they're more collectivist, right, and less individualist.
Hmm.
And we don't have to lose our individual nature to learn from those cultures. We can take what is working there and still maintain our individualist culture and apply some of those things. I think the same thing came up when you mentioned there's a lot of fear that if we try to solve some of these problems around suffering and silence and the male loneliness and male mental health epidemic, that we might lose the value that we bring as men into the world. And that's a valid fear. And I think we should keep that in mind, but it shouldn't stop us from working on these things. If anything, it gives us a nice constraint to the problem, because when you don't have constraints around a problem, it gets really hard to solve it, right? Because the solution to this is not that we just lose our masculinity completely and then try to be women and just adopt him. That's just not going to be authentic for us, right? It's not going to solve the problem. And
Right.
the world needs masculinity just as much as it needs femininity. So I'm with you, and I think there is a path forward that allows us to preserve. So then that begs the question, like, what at its core about masculinity do we need to preserve? And what are we saying? This is, sometimes we call it toxic, right? Not healthy, not helpful. What is not helpful that we should probably try to let go of? Because I think a lot of this is not about adding anything. It's just, what do we need to remove?
Mm.
So that's what I learned in my process as well. When you ask about my journey and when I'm helping people, younger people, they're looking for answers. They're like, what do I need to do? Like, do I need to hustle more? Do I need to, do this or that? And it's like, no, it's actually, you're already where you need to be. You need to figure out what you need to let go of in order to move forward.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because from a professional perspective, I've always been a fixer. So I'm a really good problem solver. I'm not afraid of
Hmm.
much. I learn very quickly. And so I would get parachuted into problematic situations and asked to clean them up.
Yep.
And one of the things I always did in those situations, when I would ask people, I want a list of 5 things that you currently do right now that don't make any sense to you, why you do them.
Hmm.
Because everyone can do the to-do list and you can set all that
Yep.
stuff up, but
Yep.
what is it you're doing now that at some point made sense, but right now you are the subject matter expert in your position, and it doesn't make sense to you that we do this anymore? And I took over one department, and there was all this reporting going on, and this was back in the dot matrix printer days. So we were literally printing out
Yep.
boxes of these reports. And I mean, like it was so big, we had to have a van that ran them between. That's how many reports you had to have a van.
Damn.
Couldn't even fit them in
Damn.
a car. So, and so I said, who uses these? Who reads these? And they're like, so and so reads them, and so reads them, and galactic commander of this and galactic commander of that. And I said, I think it's bullshit. I don't think they read these at all. And they said, well, I'm telling you that they do. And so I called the reporting group and said, I want to stop these reports from printing next week. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, stop them all. And I just waited. You know how many calls I got? Zero. I didn't get a single call. And about a month later, somebody said, hey, where's this report? And I said, well, I stopped it. And they said, why'd you stop it? I said, I stopped it about a month ago because I didn't think it was that important. And so, like, if it was that important, it wouldn't have taken you a month to ask me, what was it that you got from that report when you looked at it? And I can come up with a solution for that. But I'm not having people tear down reports and do all this bullshit. They got better and more productive things to do than just this. And so if you apply that same concept to kind of how we structure society and what our expectations are from the people in our society, I think there's a ton of merit in that. I think there's a ton of merit.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, I was thinking about why weren't the people generating the reports? Why didn't they do what you did? And like, I think you're a smart guy, but I don't think that you're like exponentially smarter than them, right?
Don't tell anybody. I've convinced them otherwise. Don't tell. You figured it out in half an hour, Alex.
You know, people are always doing the best that they can with what they know. And it's very likely that they're like, well, if we stop doing this, somebody's going to look at us and be like, what am I paying you for? Like, and they've got bills to pay and they have families to feed and they have themselves, whatever. Like, and so if they were to stop doing those reports, you came in and you said, you know what? I'm going to take this on my shoulders. I'm going to say, you don't need to do this anymore. I'm going to take the heat on it. And that gave them permission to stop and then pivot towards more productive efforts. The same thing happens within ourselves. I'm glad you used that example because the same thing happens within ourselves. Now, this is where we're getting into woo psychology stuff, but like you hear this all the time about your childhood trauma. You respond to that with things that serve you in your childhood. And they do serve you. They're coping mechanisms. They help you get through your childhood. But then you hit a point where they're not serving you anymore, like those reports. They're these huge vans full of, it's a great analogy, right? Those huge vans full of reports are often like these thoughts in your head when like Joe doesn't respond to my email right away. So I'm like thinking, oh, he must have been offended by the last thing I said, or like, maybe he doesn't like me anymore, whatever. I didn't go through that, but it's just an example. I just thought you were doing a power play on me or something. I'm just joking. But it's you do have those, right? It's like that van full of reports in your head. And the thing inside your head that's generating the reports, it's like, I need to keep generating these so I can stay relevant because I need to be relevant because I'm here to serve a purpose. And so you do the same exercise you did. You come in and you say, thank you for all the reports you generated for me, all the work, all the, the negative self-talk you gave me or whatever it was that you were doing. But I'm okay now. I'm safe now. I'm not in that situation anymore. I don't need those reports anymore. You can chill out. And, they're still maybe going to create some every now and then because, they'll still be there. But they're not going to consume as much of your time and resource. And you can pivot that horsepower towards more useful, productive things like the podcast you want to start, the app you want to build, the relationship that you want to invest in, the family that you want to create, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's funny too, because so I'm glad you touched on kind of the psychology stuff. And I don't think most people understand that their brain, everybody, and this is everybody, this is the human condition. Your brain is designed to keep you alive. It's not designed to optimize your life. You actually have to do that on your own, and you actually have to.
It's not designed to make you happy.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's designed to literally keep you alive.
Yeah.
And so what your brain does is it says, "Hey, everything that we've been doing has kept us alive. We've got food, we've got water, we've got shelter. We're not going to leave the earth if this continues. So I want everything to continue just the way it is, even the
Hmm.
bad shit, because
Hmm.
maybe that's one of the things that's keeping us alive. Your brain hates change. And
Yes.
so even if that change has a really potentially positive impact on
Hmm.
your life, your brain is going to resist it.
Hmm.
And you have to figure out coping mechanisms by which you can change those thought processes, which will help you change your actions, which will yield different results, which in theory, if you're intentional about it, should yield a happier and more fulfilled life. Much
Hmm.
easier to say, like I just did, than to actually implement. But I think if you start with knowing that your brain is not on your side, left to its own devices, it's a good
Hmm.
jumping off point. You have to learn to control how you think if you want to be successful in changing your life.
Yeah. I think what I would challenge is it's not just what you think, but it's what you feel and how you react to what you feel. Um, because everything you had outlined an algorithm of, it's going to protect you, so you think these things and then you do these things, and those affect your thoughts. And I didn't hear anything in there about the feeling part, because the feeling part is what makes it so fucking hard.
Mm,
If it was just purely thinking, like it would be easy and we would just all like, hey, I'll just tell you the right thoughts, and then you just start thinking those thoughts and then you're done, right? Like a computer, you just reprogram it. But we're
yep.
not we're not thinking machines that happen to feel, we're feeling machines that happen to think. So you have to figure out what are the emotions that are keeping you stuck in those. You did mention you did mention, so I'm wrong, you did mention emotion, which was the fear of change.
Mm,
That's the first emotion to face, is that fear. And what's funny is like as men, um, it's hard to face fear. It's hard to, because the first thing you have to do is admit that there's fear there. What we usually do is we will approach it with anger. Like, well, in fact, I just came out of a therapy session earlier today, and I was talking about the work I've been doing. And my therapist and I were like, "Well, you're making a progress. You're not where you want to be." And I'm like, "I'm just so fucking frustrated that I'm not where I want to be yet." Like, and that that's an emotion too, and that's what I'm working on now, is learning how to be patient with myself. But if I don't face that frustration and the anger I have, I'm likely to start to spiral into thinking, "Oh, I this is I'm not capable of making progress, because look, I'm getting emotional, and damn, what's wrong with me? Why am I not moving fast enough? Gosh, I just like, man, I just suck, and this is further evidence that I can't do this." And then I start to spiral, right? But instead, I'm like, yeah, it's okay to be frustrated. Of course you're frustrated. Of course you're angry that you're not where you want to be, because you really want to be there, and that's okay. So I think the reason we get stuck in those thoughts, well, we can't change those thoughts, is because we're not willing to face the emotions behind them. And the last thing I want to say there is that oftentimes the emotion that we need to get to, let's say we want to get to a place where we're accepting our emotional state, like I was just talking about. I want to get to a place where I can just accept that it's going to take time for me to get where I want to be. I can't go from sadness and frustration all the way to acceptance. That's a huge leap, right? Because again, going back to the emotional frequency thing, sadness and acceptance are like a 200 hertz, and sorry, sadness and frustration are like a 200 hertz frequency, and acceptance is like 1,000. You can't just go from 200 to 1,000 like that. You
yep.
have to go from 200 to 300, and then 300 to 400, right? There's some books on this. It was called Levels of Energy, where they talk about this. But and so for me to get towards acceptance, I have to go through, okay, I'm frustrated, I'm sad, I'm angry. I have the courage to face the fact that I'm not where I can be. I have the ability to love that this is a struggle. I can love that this is a hard process. I can love that this is challenging. And then I can move to acceptance. But that doesn't happen through a thought process. I have to experience each of those feelings and go through them and process them. Am I making sense?
No, you're making perfect sense. I think from my perspective, I think to me at least, the first step in that process. And again, I'm not a doctor. I didn't stay at Holiday Inn Express last night. I sell groceries for a
Yeah.
living. You can
Yeah.
take that for what it's worth. But I can read, and I've got a lot of life experience, and I've been good at making changes to myself. And some of the things I've learned, your amygdala is where your kind of fight or flight survival response comes. So when your amygdala gets triggered, it kind of takes over everything else. It shuts the rest of your brain down and says, nope, I got this. Your amygdala is
Mhm.
like the fireman that shows up at a fire. It takes control and gets everybody out of the building. The problem is there's many times there's not a fire when you call the fireman, at least in your brain, right? So you got to say, hey,
Yep.
appreciate it. Go back to the
Yep.
firehouse. We'll call you when we really need you.
Yep.
And you want to re-engage your prefrontal cortex, which is where creativity and problem solving and logical thought happen, so that you can
Mhm.
kind of work through the thoughts you need to experience and deal with these
Mhm.
emotions. And so if you can develop coping mechanisms that help you disengage your amygdala and re-engage your prefrontal cortex, then you can start working through these series of emotions and series of thoughts that are integral and impossible to ignore if you actually want to get past whatever it is you're experiencing. Like we've talked about before, you have to
Mhm.
go through it. And like you just walked through the
Yeah.
progression. It's not a Porsche. It doesn't go from 0 to 100 in 4.2 seconds. It's a
Yeah.
Camry. And you've got to ease
Exactly.
out of the light and get up to the speed limit gradually.
And a manual transmission one too. You have to
Right.
move through the gears, right? You can't
Yes.
just jump from first. I mean, you could jump from first to fifth, but like you're going to strip the gears. Like
Yeah. It's not good. It's not good. That's right.
it's not sustainable. Yeah, I love that analogy. But it's also like part of the reason that your amygdala will go off too if you're because I think the mistake that we make is that we believe that our conscious mind, the one that's thinking through all these things, is the one that's doing all the thinking and decision making and all of that. Like these words are coming out of my mouth faster than I have time to consciously think about them,
Mm.
right? Yours is
Yep.
too. I mean, you might take a
Totally.
moment you might consciously think, I'm going to say something about this to Alex, but then it just something else is going on in there.
It's one of the
And
benefits of being authentic is that
yeah,
you don't regret what you say. Cause like if you're
yeah,
not
you're just
authentic, you're going to spit out a
well,
bunch of bullshit, you know?
I mean, you might regret it, but at least you'll own it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole nother. We could have a whole topic around a whole talk about regret, and like I think regret is actually a really healthy. Fun. I don't. I like this. I'm absolutely no regrets. That's somebody who. Well, anyways, that's a whole nother can of worms. We'll talk about that
Mm.
separately. But let me go back to like this because the amygdala, it was serving us in a time when we didn't have language, um, when we lived in the wild and you know, even think about before fire, even, like it was a really rough world that we were trying to survive in. And the amygdala was there because everything was a threat.
Big time. Yeah.
Yeah, everything's a threat. And now there's very little existential threats that are within our control. Most of the existential threats are not even in our control now, right? Like most of the existential threats, nuclear war, or losing my
Right.
job, things like that. And so when the threat is, and I'm like in real time formulating a thought here, so I want to clarify that this may not land. But what happens is that we have these threats coming in and we can't even control them, and so now we're like freaking out about the election, about what this president did, what that politician did, all these things that are outside of our control. And that amygdala is firing off and firing off. And so I guess what I'm getting to is that we can't think our way out of the amygdala not firing. Like the amygdala is just going to fire when it wants to fire. We have to connect with what are the feelings that are triggering that amygdala to go off, right? And oftentimes those feelings are tied to some unconscious belief, right? Which is like, for example, if I'm in a meeting and with a bunch of C-suite executives, and I'm the middle manager, and they start ripping apart my proposal, and I have this belief that this proposal represents my worth as a person, and they're ripping it apart. My amygdala is going to go off because it's like I'm in danger, I'm in threat.
Hmm.
But if I have a belief that getting this feedback from them is helpful, that they are wanting me to be successful, that I can take, even if they don't want me to be successful, but I can at least, this feedback will help me produce a better work product in the future. And that I am worthy enough as I am, that I can take, that I believe that I can take this feedback and I can make it useful. Not that it means that I'm worthless or not valuable. That amygdala is not going to fire off because I won't feel the threat. I'm going to feel love and joy and hope because this is such useful feedback because I can use it somewhere. Now, I might lose my job because, they might be like this, this proposal sucks and that's what we hired you to do. But again, losing my job, well, does that mean that I'm less of a person? No, it just means
Right.
that my role here is no longer my path forward, and there's a new path forward for me in life. And who's to say that that new path forward might not be better than the one I was on? You don't know. You'll never know. You don't know that if you would have kept that job, that you might have been involved in some corruption scandal, or you might have like been miserable for the next 5 years, or whatever would have happened, right? So all you know is that it doesn't have anything to do with your worth at your core. And it just represents a change in the world around you that you have no control over. And it does create new opportunities for you that if you are in that expansive view of like love and appreciation and acceptance, you will see those opportunities. But if you are in this narrow, fearful view, because fear and hate and anger narrow. Ayush and I talked about this as like blinders. They, anger and
Yes.
fear, they become like blinders, and you stop seeing the opportunities around you. And this is where like I'm like a lot of different of these, minority groups, right? And a lot of us, we get caught up in this like, and I'm not trying to victim blame here. I'm just trying to say this is a risk that sometimes we have when we're in one of these groups of like, look at how we're being oppressed, and we get angry about it, and we stop seeing the opportunities around us
Mm.
to make our lives better. That doesn't mean that we're still in a disadvantage. We are still at a disadvantage, but we're making it even more of a disadvantage by focusing on the fear and not on like, okay, but what opportunities do open up for me if I face acceptance and love? What opportunities are there that I can go after? And so I think that's why a lot of times we see people get upset about the idea of people getting like focused on being a victim. It's more than that. It's the fact that when you're focusing on being a victim, you're focusing on fear and anger, and you're not focusing on love and acceptance and expansiveness and seeing the opportunities in front of you, which were easier for some people to see when all they have around them is, you know, opportunities, and they're so abundant. But when they're not, it can be hard to see them.
Yeah, it's a little corollary, but very germane to what we're talking about here. So, as you know, I run a company that operates grocery stores in Chicago, and so with this whole EBT freeze that's imminent as of Saturday, the neighborhoods we operate in are disadvantaged for sure, and well over half of our transactions are paid for through government assistance. And so we've got a lot of customers who are going to be impacted by this should it not be resolved in the next 48 hours. And so I've been obviously watching it and making plans and doing anything we can to be prepared for it from a variety of perspectives. And so I've seen a lot of social media content about both people who receive EBT that are clearly in panic mode because they're making kind of crazy statements about what their intentions are if EBT is stopped. And
Mhm.
then I see rebuttal videos from people who are in the exact circumstance you just described, which is I don't know what it's like to have to feed four kids by myself without regular income. And in
Mhm.
my world, I would go do this, I would get a job, I would blah, 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 blah. And how dare you think that you can do these? Both sides are talking right over the top of each other. And there's
Yes.
absolutely no way to form a solution when you can't
Yeah.
communicate directly and see the
Yeah.
valid points that each side are making, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that um it needs to start with this is going to be this probably this could cause some controversy, but good. I need to say controversial things. But I think that if one side needs to start it, it needs to be the advantage side because
Mm,
it is so hard when you are in a place of scarcity to see, if you're starving and you're about to hit imminent starvation, that's a life or death thing. It's really hard to see all of that. And so you need the advantage side to say, before attacking and saying, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Back to what I was saying before, they just say, man, I can't imagine what that's like to have to feed a family of four. And then now I'm not going to be able to without any warning. And I have to scramble. And I also, I think I read somewhere that the majority of these people work. So they have a job to hold down to on top of their families. Um, and so, like, you can imagine what they're going through and have that empathy and try to understand the struggles they're going through. And once you can do that, they're going to be more willing to, the disadvantaged side is going to be more willing to open up and say, oh, I feel supported and you understand where I'm coming from. Now let's work together to find a solution. But until you can validate me, I'm just going to keep pushing back because I don't think you have my best interests at heart when you don't seem to empathize with what I'm going through. And this
yeah,
happens at the micro level and at the macro level, like one on one, and as well as like in these big group conversations.
for sure. And to go along with that, I do think we as a society have created a place where learned helplessness is very easy for people to fall into.
Mhm.
And I don't think that's a good scenario for us as a society. One thing I'm sure of is that the solution is not to name call and disparage people who think differently than you. Like that's
Yeah, and I think
that's
it
not the
also
solution at all.
the solution is also not to assume that all helplessness is learned helplessness.
Yep.
I think that's what happens. Like I see people saying, well, you guys need to learn how to, you need to learn how to work and how to do this and that. And it's like, but like, yeah, I looked at the statistics and maybe the statistics I look at were wrong, but and it doesn't surprise me when I look at them that if you're on minimum wage, how do you feed a family of four? Like we know how
Yeah. And
expensive it
so
is. Like,
no, totally. You're totally right.
yeah, yeah.
My and where I think about learned helplessness isn't as base as you just well, that's part of it for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah.
But like one of the things I try to explain to people, and you'll understand this because of what you do, is you've got to change how you think about compensation in the marketplace.
Mm.
Like you are compensated at a lower level because you don't bring a unique skill set that demands a higher compensation level. So
Mhm.
if they can hire someone else and teach them the skills that you have at your job in a relatively short period of time, then you're not going to be compensated at an outsized rate in the marketplace. And I always use athletics and performers as the example for this. So, what an athlete does, or what a musician or an actor does, is a skill that almost nobody else has. And
Mhm.
there is a market by which you can be rewarded very handsomely for that skill, and
Mhm.
someone can sell the product that comes from that skill.
Mhm.
Therefore, there's this huge pot of money of which you can get an outsized slice of. You've got to stop thinking about trading your time for money as the reason you're compensated and think about the skills you bring to the marketplace as the reason you're compensated. That's something that has to be taught to most people. And if you
Yeah.
just train people to think, I'm going to trade my time for money and I want more money for my time, that's going to be a difficult negotiation for that person because the laws of supply and demand are real. And if there's
Mhm.
plenty of supply for labor, you're not going to be able to demand a higher wage. Someone else will do what you're doing
Mhm.
at a commensurate level for
Yeah.
somewhere near the same
Yeah.
compensation.
No, I mean, you're preaching to the choir. Like I, I think, things like minimum wage is an arbitrary rate.
Yeah.
But it's like also at the same time, we have people, and again, I want to be very clear. Like, I am a big fan of capitalism. I wouldn't have the career I have if it wasn't for, I didn't go to college. Like, I wouldn't have this career without capitalism, because employers are like, hey, you have merit with what you do. Your skills give me what you need. Um, and because of capitalism, I was given the career, or was able to build the career that I have. I don't want to say I was given it, because I had to work for it.
Sure.
Um, and I don't have an answer for any of this either, by the way. I don't have an answer. This is a really hard problem. But I just want to point out that the challenge is right now we have, I don't know what the number is. I think it's in the well double digits now. Computer science majors are graduating and they're not able to find jobs.
Mm,
And okay, so you might say, well, the market doesn't need more computer science majors, so go do something else. It's like, well, I just spent 4 years doing that. It's like, well, too bad the market's that way. Okay, well, what should I do? Well, you should go into the trades. It's like, okay, try to go into the trades, because from my understanding is that the trades are very there's a lot of nepotism, there's a lot of competition. Like, it's not easy. Like, yes, you can tell people you're not getting paid enough because you're not differentiated, go differentiate yourself. I've got a family to feed, I've got a life to try to survive, right? The problem is bigger than any one individual person. And again, I don't think the answer is to centralize control of the economy. I don't want people to think that I'm making that argument, because I don't think that works either.
yeah.
And I don't think the answer is to just add more. Like I said, I'm a big fan of what do you need to remove, right? I think there's things that are probably getting in the way of people being able to be rewarded for their unique value. I think that's one of the things that gets me really excited about AI. I think a lot of people are afraid of AI because it's going to automate even more of what humans do. But I would argue it's going to automate more of what doesn't differentiate us from each other, and leave room for us to do more of what does. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how to get there from here, but I think we need to fast, because this problem, this disparity is just going to get worse and worse. We need to find ways to leverage the unique value that each person brings and use it to help society as a whole be more effective. And I think there is this problem of this demand of constantly increasing productivity, right? I think
Mm.
capitalism demands that, and some people say, but like, when do you stop? Like, do we just work 80-hour weeks and but at the same time, I think part of the reason why we need that is because as a society, we keep growing and we keep growing. We want to be able to have, offspring. We want to grow. We don't want to decline as a species. We don't want to start lowering our numbers, right? We want to create more opportunities for more life, for more people. And so there's like this balance of how do you ensure that each person can be productive and contribute back and help with the growth of humanity, but do it in a way that we're not either going down total draconian measures where everybody is centrally controlled, or down a route where it's just this relentless free market that's just trying to squeeze every last inch of productivity out of every person. And if you're not productive, you should just starve and die, right? I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's important to recognize that nobody has a perfect solution, and we need to be empathetic that it's a hard situation we're in, and we can't be pointing the finger at individuals. We need to be looking at the system.
Yes, totally. I totally agree. I think that's right.
I mean, obviously there are some individuals that are irresponsible, yes, but we can't assume that everybody is.
Yeah, look,
Yeah,
it's a bell curve, right? And
yeah,
most people fall in the middle of the bell curve. Are there
that's right.
statistical anomalies on the tails of the bell curve? Of course there are. There always are.
Totally.
That's the way any
Yeah.
set data set plays out. It is
Hmm.
what it is. So you had talked about, saying something controversial earlier about the advantaged group needing to take the leadership role in a conversation. I don't find that all that controversial, but fine. I'll tell you something controversial. I think one of the biggest challenges to the wage compression, and my wife has said this for years, and I think she's 100% right, is it's women entering the workforce and the reliance of society on a two income household. And that is not in any way, shape, or form me advocating for women to go back to being barefoot and pregnant and silent in the kitchen. However, It used to be that women largely wanted to raise a family and contribute to society by bringing into the world and raising the next generation of people. And when they entered the workforce, it created more supply. And what does
Mhm.
higher supply do? It drives down demand, which drives down cost, which lowers average wage. And I think if more people thought about it that way, they'd think differently. And you grew up in the same time period I did. It used to be, and maybe you had a different upbringing than me. Going out to a restaurant was a big deal when I was a kid. You did not do it very often. Almost every meal we ate
Mhm.
was made at home by our parents, my mom in particular. We didn't take big fit. We didn't go to Disneyland or Disney World every year.
Yeah.
Cable TV was a luxury if you had it.
Mhm.
I go back to three channels. I remember when Fox came out. There was a fourth TV channel. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so we've kind of raised the standard of what people think are necessities that are not
Mhm.
necessities. Cars are more expensive, housing's more expensive. And in my opinion, a lot of that has to do with regulation. Like you had talked about the trades, and you're right. It's difficult to go into the trades and start your own business, largely because there are requirements that you have to work as an apprentice and or under somebody else's license for a minimum number of years before you're allowed to sit and take the test to get your own license. So
So you could be
let's just
totally
say,
qualified, but if you don't get pulled into an
yeah,
apprenticeship, you're screwed.
yeah, let's
Yeah.
say you or me
Mhm.
are, we can study and we're intelligent and I can
Yeah.
learn HVAC. I can learn it by watching
Yeah.
YouTube and training myself, and it takes me 6 months to do that. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter. I don't have
Yeah.
5 years of W 2s that show I
Mhm.
worked for an HVAC company. They won't even let me take the test. And I think the regulations around a lot of those things are what hold people back, at least from my experience. And I've dealt a lot in that because I ran a construction company on the side when I was flipping houses for years, so I'm pretty familiar with that world.
I'm glad you brought up flipping houses because I think that's part of this conversation. Um, so I agree with you that like when when more women or more people enter the workforce, there's more demand. But the way that I learned, again, I'm not an economics major, but what I learned about capitalism is that when you have more people in the workforce, you also create more supply as well. Technology is a good example. With technology, we're able to create more supply with technology. As a great example with Instagram and TikTok, just a small group of people have created this platform that now enables everyone to produce content at scale. And now it creates tons of supply to match the massive demand that's coming into the platform, right? I think that the supply and demand thing fell out of whack when it comes to less about goods than services and more to do with property and real estate. I could be wrong, but I think that the biggest thing I've seen change over the years, yeah, we've had some inflation, but if you look at the most households now have these massive TVs that would have cost thousands of dollars, and now you can buy them for like
Right.
$300, right? So supply and demand's worked well there, but where it hasn't helped is with things like housing. I used to be like a total laissez-faire capitalist, and I still am to some extent. I think that like the reason of capitalism, the value of capitalism, is that it uses the incentive of profit to motivate efficiencies and more supply, right? To create more supply through efficiencies, through more intelligent, more productive means of production. This breaks down when it comes to rent seeking behaviors. It breaks down when it comes to things like property, where you buy a property and then you flip it and you make a profit. Did you create more supply and more productivity in the world? No, you just made more profit off of an existing thing that was already there. There's no more productivity, there's no more efficiency, there's no more supply of housing. It's just you just made more money off of the same house. And so there's there's this school of thought that is thinking about what if we stopped allowing profit on non-productive activities and only allowing. Another example is like patent trolls. People will come along and they'll come to a business. When I was at Amazon, we'd have tons of these. They would hold all these patents for technology, and they'd say, "Oh, you're violating this patent, violating that patent," and they would take hundreds of millions of dollars from us, and they would do nothing productive with it. It was
Mhm.
just because they're, you know, and so if you look at the trends when, in the 60s and 70s, and before that, housing was seen as not as an asset but a liability. It was just something you had to buy to live in. And then sometime, I think it was like in the 70s, 80s, it started to be seen as an appreciating thing that people expect to get a big return and profit out of. And as we see that increase, and we've seen now we're at a place where housing is so unaffordable that, the new generation coming in, the chances of them being homeowners is shrinking dramatically. I don't see how that's helping the economy in this situation. Again, I'm not an economist. I don't know the whole story, but my gut tells me that maybe we're not really implementing this capitalism thing properly. Does that make sense?
It does. So it's funny because my degree actually is in economics,
Okay,
which
well then you tell me.
no. So I was just going to say that doesn't mean anything other than I studied economics in college. It doesn't necessarily mean I learned it all or that I'm smart. Like I am not.
Yeah,
Arguments from a position of authority never resonate with me, and I don't make them. It's
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah,
statement of
yeah. Yep,
fact that
totally, totally.
my degree's in economics, so it is what it is. On the housing thing, the to me the biggest challenge I see is the zoning in particular cities,
Hmm.
and
Yeah, yeah,
if housing was if it was a macroeconomic issue, then housing would be unaffordable everywhere in the country, at least the way I think about it. And it's not unaffordable everywhere in the country, but it's extremely unaffordable in many places in the
hmm,
country. Now, if you look at those places, some of them are easy to explain. New York, San Francisco, and Seattle are good examples of housing that's driven up by geography, right? So
hmm.
you've got a
And zoning.
peninsula. Yeah, you've got a peninsula bordered by three sides on water, and there
Hmm.
is no more real estate by which you can expand. The only way to build is up. You've got more people moving there, so you've got an increased demand and an artificially by geography limited supply. It makes sense to me that the rents in places like San Francisco, Seattle, and New York are going up. And I picked those three on purpose because they're very specific. Now, if you look at cities like Chicago or Los Angeles or Houston, which are also really large cities, there are not the geographic boundaries or parameters that stop it from happening. But if you look at housing in Los Angeles compared to Houston, housing in Los Angeles is much less affordable than Houston and much less affordable than Chicago. And Houston's much more affordable than Chicago. And if you look at the zoning regulations in Chicago and Los Angeles, they're very restrictive. If you look at the
Hmm.
permitting process in Chicago
Yeah,
and Los Angeles, they're also very restrictive. Is that the only answer? No, but I think it's a big
yeah.
component
Oh
to
yeah,
the answer. If you
yeah,
allowed developers to be able to make a reasonable profit, they would build new units and make a reasonable profit. By increasing supply, you would lower costs and make those cities more affordable. But you wind up with a lot of zoning because people don't want apartment buildings in their nice neighborhood.
yeah.
So you're
I,
not
I mean,
allowed
I
to
agree
build.
with you that zoning is a big part because without, zoning prevents you from, because those boundaries, by the way, are arbitrary. Like one of the things I used to study urban planning because it's probably the autism, but like I would just study it for fun. Um, and one of the things that I learned was that like these like so people will talk about you compare populations of like Seattle, for example. If you look at Seattle proper, there's only 500,000 people in Seattle proper.
Mhm.
But like the metro area is like massive, right? There's like 5 or 6 million in the metro area. And that's just
Redmond,
because we're,
Mercer Island, yeah, all the
yeah,
other. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just because of where the city boundaries got drawn. People will say, "Oh, it's because it's on a peninsula." It's like, well, sure, but you can build bridges, and also the land goes up this way, and the land goes that way, and like, and there's an amazing ferry system that connects that to all the islands. So technically, it's not isolated. It's just that there's these artificial boundaries that get placed, and everyone wants to live in this particular area. And
Mm.
then, yeah, zoning gets in the way because then it's like, well, we could build affordable housing because if we could build upwards, we could do it, but we're not allowed to because of the people who don't want that in my backyard. They don't want their views blocked and blah, blah, blah. I used to live in Seattle, so I remember a lot of that. Now I live in LA,
I was
which is
from
funny
Seattle.
because,
Yeah.
yeah, now I live in LA and I see how LA's city boundaries are massive and the metro area is sprawling. And to argue that we don't have enough land is hilarious. There's so many lots here that are just parking lots or unused. And again, it's zoning in some cases. In some cases, it's because the parking lot is more of there's speculation where it's like I'd rather have a parking lot here that doesn't get taxed and I'm going to sit on it as long as I can until the value hits a point where it's worth it for me to build property that I will then get taxed on. And so you have the speculation that leads to underutilized land, right?
Mm.
And again, I think that like I think that if you had an economic system where there was pressure for productive use of anything, land as an example, then that system would say, okay, you can't have these zoning laws because they're not allowing for productive uses of the land, right? You're rent seeking. You're just keeping a parking lot there to collect parking fees and not have to pay taxes on a high rise or take the risk of building a high rise and having nobody come into it and be tenants. Like you're not making productive use of that land. You need to do something with it or give it up. And so it's tricky, right? Because then what do you do about property ownership? What do you do about,
Right.
I have this house here that I just sold and I made, money off of it because I was expecting to make money off it. Like, what do you do with that? Like, it's not, you can't solve it overnight. But I just want to point out a flaw in the current system, which is that everywhere else in our capitalistic system, there's pressure to create productive use of whatever resources that you have invested in. But that's not the case with real estate. There's just rent seeking pressure. Just make as much rent as possible or equity building and then sell and collect your equity and move on.
Yeah, I think the only place I could see, I agree with you. I agree with what you just said. I think the only place I could see increased productivity is the increased tax revenue that is generated off of property taxes, because that goes back into the base of schools and fire departments and police departments and things like that. And so, in order to keep those things going and keep up with the inflation rates, property taxes kind of steadily march on. That would be the
Yeah.
only place I could see
Yeah.
a
I'm not
productivity
arguing
argument
for,
there. Yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't, I don't know what, I don't know. I don't have an argument about removing property tax or keeping it. You're probably right. You probably need to keep it. I haven't thought about it, but yeah, I think, but ultimately, I think what I'm trying to point out is that the part of the reason why we have this, the zoning, there's no pressure to remove those zoning laws is because there's no pressure to make those land uses productive. There's a lot of pressure to like keep them nimbied up.
And I'm anti-profiteering, so just I want to be clear about that. I totally agree with you. In that particular instance, I think the solution is deregulation to allow increased building. I think that would stop profiteering, because the minute someone started to make an outsized profit, other people would notice and go, "I'm getting in on the action." And
I like to think of it as rent seeking because it's I think it's healthy for us to because if you say profiteering, people might seem that you're like assuming I don't think you're saying that you're against taking profit because like we all do that, right? When people come to work for you, they're taking some profit off of I'm putting my
yeah,
time in and right. So like I think that's healthy, but I think you're arguing for like not rent seeking, but instead I'm going to try to maximize the value of this land if there weren't those zoning regulations. I wouldn't just put, parking lot there because wow, now I could like put in this big skyscraper and sell a bunch of condos in it or, affordable housing if that's which is very much in demand. You'll get a lot of support there from people wanting it, or whatever it is that could bring you that return on your investment.
yeah. Totally. No, I totally get that. And I think,
How did we get from talking about like
that's funny. I
yeah,
was
yeah,
literally
yeah.
just thinking that.
We just lost the plot.
But look, that's okay because like I told you, our podcast is about getting people to think about living a happy and productive and fulfilling life. I think
Yeah.
that runs a wide gamut, right? And
Yes.
I think if you're thoughtful about the world you live in and how you interact with that world and the various components of that world, dealing with these things and thinking through these things and talking about these things will help you get to that spot. So it's a no holds barred. Our
Well, I
podcast
think
has
it's a
always been a no holds barred conversation.
well, I think it's us exercising, in these conversations, we aren't talking about like we're not saying like, well, it's all because of this group's fault or it's all because of that problems. We're like, where are the opportunities to make this better? Where are the systemic issues and how could they be addressed? And so we're demonstrating that at this macro societal level in this conversation. And I think that's how we got from that because we were looking at it with an individual level and they're like, okay, well, let's look at this at the societal level. And it's a much
Yep.
more expansive view of it. It's not us saying like, well, the answer is we all need to do this one thing, or the answer is it's like, no, there's a nuance here, and we need to understand it and unpack it and take the layers apart and acknowledge that it's not perfect. We have to acknowledge that there's issues, and then we have to figure out where we can go from here, just like we would within ourselves when we're dealing with these emotions and being stuck in life. So that's my answer to how we got from that.
It's funny you say that because one of the things I try to tell people a lot is when you hear someone that says they know exactly what you should do or they've got the answer, you should be very, very leery. Like
Hmm.
that should send bells and whistles off in your head because
Hmm.
nobody has all that stuff figured out. Life is shades of gray, and you've got to figure out what works for you and fits in your life, and that might be similar to me or to you, but it's always going to be a little bit different. It's always going to be a
Yeah.
little bit different.
Bro, you just made me realize that we do that to ourselves too, right? Like we be careful when you do that to yourself when you're like, you know what? You just got to do X. You just got to suck it
I
up. You
know.
just got to do this. We do that to ourselves, right? We tell ourselves like the answer is this. You just got to do this and it'll,
Yes.
right? So be suspicious when you do that to yourself and stop and reflect on saying like it's okay to not know what the answer is. Let's spend some time just let's sit in the mud a little bit. Let's get a little bit comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing the answer, of experiencing the frustration, the sadness, the anger, the disappointment, the fucking tears, whatever it is we have to experience before we jump to, I know exactly what the answer is, right?
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I hadn't until you said that out loud. I'd never thought about it that way. That's a great. That's a great
I didn't
call
think of it
out.
out that way until you said that. So go team.
I'd never applied it to myself. It's as crazy as that
Yeah.
sounds. Till you said it
Yeah.
out loud, I literally never thought about it in my
And I
own
never
like
thought about telling somebody to be suspicious when people are like, but yeah, I'm going to take that one and use that. That's a good one.
ask a lot of questions. That's awesome.
Mm.
Well, so man, look, there's tons of other things we can talk about. I feel like you're just going to be a regular on my podcast where we just do this every month or so.
Sounds good to
um,
me.
I know I'm coming on to your podcast, but like there's all sorts of things we haven't talked about yet. And like life changes and we'll have plenty of things to talk about.
Yep.
Um, if you've got anything else pressing tonight, happy to chat about it. We've been going up close on 2 hours here. And I know you had kind of a meat grinder day. So if you want a little mental health break, that's cool. We'll just stay in touch via text. And
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
We'll catch up on my podcast and let's do this again soon.
yeah, totally loved it. I've been looking forward to our conversation, and it did not disappoint in any way, shape, or form. I'm glad we had this time together.
Likewise, I couldn't have even imagined. I didn't try not to actually. I tried not to imagine how this would go down. So this went down way better than I'd imagined, and you gave me some really interesting things to think about. And I always learn something new when I share how I think about things. People are a reflection, they're a mirror, and then you start to see things in your own point of view that you didn't see before, and then you get more clarity. So you really helped me find that clarity by being that mirror. So thank you.
Well, yeah, appreciate the kind words and ditto. That's what I love about doing my podcast is I learn from my podcast and like it costs me nothing. Like it's such and then I
Yeah,
expand my network and like it's got
yeah,
so many benefits to it. Like it's such a great deal and it's wild to me that it's doing what it's doing. So I'm just
totally.
grateful for it. Yeah.
Thank you for having me on. It was awesome and looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, me too. Thanks a lot, Alex.
All right. Take care.
All
See ya.
right. See you, buddy.
Bye.
Okay, guys, there you go. So, like we said, Alex, just a great guy all around, super thoughtful, covered a wide range of topics. Appreciate his willingness to just kind of talk about things that he struggled with and things that he's learned and how he approaches those things now, how he thinks about things, how he tries to work through those things with other people and help them get to better spots. And yeah, like you heard there at the end, look, Alex, you'll probably be seeing Alex pretty regularly on the podcast. He's just such a great guy to talk to, and we learn so much every time we talk to him. We will definitely have him back on, and I am going on his podcast, which I'm looking forward to. When that comes out, we can publish the link to it as well, so you can catch that as well. So much thanks to Alex. Get used to seeing him because you'll probably see him on a pretty regular basis. Just a great guy, and we really enjoy the relationship we're developing with him. So, look, James puts it up over here every day. Head over to our website, saltygingertalk.com. All of our podcast episodes are available there. Links to our social media accounts are available there. We've got a newsletter we publish every weekday. You can subscribe to on our website. Make sure you like, share, comment, subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you consume it on. We're going to keep getting awesome guests like Alex. We're going to keep having these great conversations that will help you think, that'll help you process the challenges that you're having and help you work towards building a productive and meaningful and purposeful life. You don't want to miss any of that stuff because it's great stuff. We find great people, super interesting conversations, and make sure you catch our next episode. All right. We'll see you guys there. Look, James puts it up over here every day. Head over to our website, saltygingertalk.com. All of our podcast episodes are available there. Links to our social media accounts are available there.